There we go. Good evening, everybody. How are you? little more humid this week than we've had in the past, but boy, it feels good. We're actually going to be looking at a few things tonight that have kind of sprung to life since we've added water this past week. We've got some snakes on the docket. We've got some birds on the docket. We've got some bugs on the docket. Lots of fun things. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and get started, she says. There we go. No, or will we? How's that?
Nope.
All right. All right. So this week's, or actually last week's column was on queen snakes. It was kind of the last in a series of columns on crayfish, although notably this is not a crayfish itself. This is the queen snake, an animal that's integral, crayfish are integral to its life cycle. The scientific name for this snake is Regina septemvittata, which Regina means queen, and septemvittata means 7 stripes, which early in its life, the snake does have 7 stripes. That drops down to less than that as the snake gets older. There's not a prominent dorsal stripe on a mature queen snake. And you know, I was curious why this snake got to be queen. And so I did a little internet searching, and I opened up some old references that I had. And the answer is nobody really seems to know. It did undergo a few nomenclature changes over the last 100 years or so, but you know, queen popped up maybe, I don't know, 90 years or so. Regina, the genus name, came into use and it stuck, but there's no real apparent reason, at least if there might have been at the time, but it has been lost to history. There is one other snake in this genus, and that is the Graham's crayfish snake, also worthy of the title of queen. But again, we're not exactly sure why. Maybe, you know, there might have been one of these things where it made sense at the time, but whatever reason, it's a cool name for a really cool snake that we're actually seeing, I won't say frequently yet, but certainly more often than we did in the past. This photo was one of several that were taken back in April, and our ecological restoration crew was doing some work at one of our nature preserves along the Fox River. This snake, it's not a youngster. It wasn't quite full grown yet either. We were guessing its age to be maybe 2 or 3. This shot kind of shows some of those stripes that give it its name on the belly. And that's the way you can tell a queen snake from a Graham's crayfish snake. The Graham's crayfish snake has a clear body, or one that is missing those stripes on the belly. And our local queens don't. They have some pretty clear markings there. If you're brave enough to pick one up and flip it over. Now, these are actually more docile. They're somewhat related to our local water snakes, which we all know and recognize as the bitiest of the local snakes. We have a very common saying that, oh, don't worry, it's going to be more afraid of you than you are of it. water snakes are really the only animal I can think of that doesn't really fit into that classification. They will actually come towards you sometimes. Maybe it's just a curiosity thing, but they do use their teeth quite freely. The queen snake's preferred method of, I don't know if you'd say defending itself or at least deterring localized threats would be to thrash around and musk and well, I'll just go ahead and say they poop a lot. They whip their tail around, they fling their feces. It's pretty effective, especially with some mammalian predators. Doesn't work so well with, as you can see with our restoration crew. They did handle the snake just briefly before returning it into the cattails. As I said, we are seeing these quite a bit more frequently. I would say in the last 2 years, we've seen them maybe 3 or 4 times. Prior to 2020, well, actually going back to 2012, this was the first time we saw one in that area. This is one that was spotted actually by our nature camp kids. We were doing nature camp at park along the river as opposed to Leroy Oaks Forest Preserve, where we've been going for years. I think there was a conflict that week or something, but it turned out really well because in addition to crayfish that the kids were catching, we also found this cool snake. Now look carefully at this one. You can see just how rough life can be for a snake in the wild. Now, one thing, you notice the eye cap over here, the snake's eyes were quite cloudy, indicating that it was heading into its shedding cycle. It might have been related to its growth, but it might also have been related to some of these other things we saw on its scales. There was a lump over here. There were a couple of dings, as though maybe it had something had tried to prey upon it. This was also in June, so it could have been that it hadn't really been out very long. Oftentimes snake will shed after they emerge from their brood or their overwintering areas. They want to get something in their belly. Shortly after that, they usually want to find a mate, and then they work on cleaning themselves up, getting that skin shed. But yeah, this snake was the first time that a queen snake had been spotted in Kane County in several decades. As I recall, we reported the finding, and the records indicated that it had been the late 1980s since the queen snake had been seen in Kane County. So that was kind of exciting. But then we didn't see any more until this one popped up in 2014. Probably not the same snake. And look at the difference. Look at the clear eye. Look at this scales, much better shape. Now, granted, this was later in the season too, but this shot also gives us a glimpse of those stripes that run down the belly. You can the eye of the queen snake, it reminds me very much of the eyes of the water snake. It's set up just a little bit higher on the skull. Perhaps that makes it easier to see when they're swimming in the water. Very prominent, very round eyes that kind of give the snake a special character when you look at its face. Now, I mentioned, the last couple of weeks we were talking about crayfish, and of course the tie-in with crayfish and snakes this week is the snake's diet. They specialize in eating crayfish, and they don't want to settle for just any old crayfish. They want to make sure that they find those that have recently molted, and that's not hard to understand why. Just as the way we will peel a shrimp before we eat it. Although I'm going to qualify that statement. I did one time, I was invited to a friend's house, and she was trying out a recipe where you didn't have to peel the shrimp. It was, the shrimp were brined for several hours to soften that skin. So it was supposed to save time. I found out in the long run, it really was better to peel them, even though they were allegedly, the skin was supposed to be soft. It was still pretty crunchy and pretty hard. It's a much more pleasant experience to eat a shrimp when you take the skin off. And I would imagine that the white crayfish snake feels the same way. The other thing I wanted to point out here with our queen on the right here, you can see on her scales, or his or her, queen snakes do come in both varieties. You can see that there's a raised ridge on their scales, like the water snakes that they are related to. Queen snakes also have heavily keeled scales. So olive green color, and then not really much other sort of marking on the dorsal part of the snake, the back part of the snake, the part you're more likely to see, but you'll see those scales, and it gives the snake kind of a matte appearance as opposed to a glossy or shiny experience. Even if it's wet, it'll still look somewhat muted or not as shiny as we would see on some of our smooth scaled snakes. So I'm hoping to see if we can find some more queen snakes yet this summer. I may have mentioned last week our Rusty Rodeo event that's coming up the first Saturday in August. In looking for rusty crayfish in the local creeks and rivers, I also want to do a little site check ahead of time, maybe move some rocks around to see if there's some crayfish eating snakes that are also in our river, and Fearston Creek is actually where we're going to be holding that event at, Fearston Creek Park. But it would be really cool. I would love to get some footage of these snakes foraging and maybe even eating a freshly molted crayfish. If I'm not lucky, then that means you're going to be lucky too, because I'll certainly share it with you then. So with that, let's move along. I tell you, every week when I come in to do this program, I hear Nighthawks, not the late night diner Nighthawks, but these guys here. These were some photos that were sent in by a reader. They were lucky enough to have a nighthawk roost in their front yard. First, they thought this was a nest. They said, wow, you know, how did this nest get built so quickly? We watch our yard pretty closely. We hadn't seen any activity there. And then they looked a little closer and they realized that this was a common nighthawk taking a nap right there on a branch in their yard. They kindly shared these photos, and it got me to thinking it's been about a year since we talked about these guys last. I may have mentioned before, this was one of the very first birds I learned. My dad taught me this when we'd be out around dusk. He was usually coming to fetch me from a local playground where I'd be over. We played a lot of wiffle ball and things like that over there. And the rule was I had to come home when the streetlights came on, and I didn't always follow that rule. But good old dad, he turned it into a learning experience. As we'd walk home, he would point out that these birds would be soaring up above and feeding on insects. He said, just look for the white bars, and you can see them here and here. That's a one giveaway for this really interesting bird, a member of the goatsucker family. Sometimes you see them flying in the daytime, and they've got a kind of a unique profile. It can throw you sometimes if you're not thinking. You tend to think of these birds as flying in the evening. You have to look a little bit harder to see those white bars if you're seeing them flying in the daytime. As much as I try to look for them, oftentimes it's my ears that spot them or hear them first. Hear that kind of nasally. It's almost woodcock-like in the repetitiveness, but they're not. This is a courting call as it is with the woodcock. This is a flight call. And I swear that there is a pair nesting either right here in downtown St. Charles or very close. We've got a lot of flat top roofs around here, and sometimes they do nest on roofs. They are otherwise, typically they would be ground nesters. Being that they do that, they do perform just like we've seen and talked about in the past with killdeer. You know how killdeer will do that sort of well, a distraction display, but they act like their wing is broken. What they're trying to do is draw your attention away from their nest on the ground and either the eggs or the chicks. Usually, actually, it's usually the eggs because their chicks get moving pretty quickly, as we'll see. But these distraction displays are, I think they might work pretty well with predators, but with humans, it just causes people who are good with cameras to take lots of photos. I love this one on the right because it shows just how well adapted they are to capturing bugs. That's what they're doing when they're soaring overhead. Of course, in all of our river downtowns, there's plenty of bugs, especially when the street lights come on. We're usually having some sort of emergence of caddisflies, sometimes mayflies in the area. But those bugs that are flying at night are what these birds are after. And that mouth, look at how it gapes. It doesn't look like much when it's closed, but look at how it can expand, and they can swoop and use it kind of like a net to gobble up those bugs when they are not sitting on their eggs. Now, the eggs of the nighthawk, as I mentioned, they are ground nesters, but have been known to nest on rooftops. Maybe this summer I'll be able to figure out just where they are. They do forage every night right out here on 3rd Street. They seem to go up and down 3rd Street. I think the lighting is sufficient, but maybe the traffic is a little less. They really seem to like to forage from north to south out here on 3rd Street in St. Charles. When these eggs hatch, it's kind of cool. They are known, nighthawk young are known to be semi-precocial, which is a little twist on bird offspring. They come out, they've got a thick coating of down in the start of their feathers, pretty much right out of the egg. Their eyes are open or almost open. And they take their first flight in about 18 days, which for a bird that size is a pretty significant accomplishment. Within a month's time, they're flying well on their own, and they're practicing with their parents at catching their own insects, because by the time we get to 50 days, it's less than 2 months, they are living independently. I would imagine that accelerated life cycle has something to do with the migration that they're going to have to undertake. They do fly quite a distance south into Central South America to spend the winter. So they've got to get going pretty quickly and have their skills well mastered. So semi-precocial is not all birds have that. In fact, let me show you the other two terms that are used to refer to young birds are altricial and precocial. The altricial young, most of our songbirds, a lot of our raptors, I put macaws on there because that picture there at the top, that's a picture of my bird, Tommy. I have a blue and gold macaw at home. And this was a photo that was taken, I think he was about 3 days old at this time. Not super clear, but it shows you just how helpless these altricial young can be. That lower bill on a macaw, it's like a bowl that the parents will regurgitate food into. And you can see even then, my boy Tom, who's now known as King Tom, was, looking for food but was completely helpless towards getting any on his own. He was completely reliant on being fed. And we see that, you see our songbirds, our robins, our our cardinals, they are just really, really busy as they're raising their young and stuffing those gaping maws with whatever types of insect foods they can find. Now that's a big difference compared to precocial young, which we see like our ducks and our geese, a lot of shorebirds. I mentioned killdeer earlier. These birds, usually the nest is going to be away from where they are going to end up growing up, which is usually some kind of water. And so the female kind of moves away from that, usually for safety, and then marches her young more or less successfully. I know there's been a lot of reports this spring and early summer of baby mallards falling down storm drains because mom walks them over a grate as opposed to around it, but more or less successful. And we're certainly not lacking for mallard ducks or even wood ducks, which might have this skill down a little bit more because they're marching from a tree to the water. But precocial young, if you hear those terms, altricial means helpless, precocial just means that they are able to walk on their own and feed on their own pretty much right out of the egg. Just more fun terminology, might find it useful at some point in the future, or maybe even tonight, who knows? Now, this was really fun. There was a dramatic rescue the other day, somewhat less dramatically. It was a beetle rescue, but you know what? It meant a lot to that individual. And here's what happened. I was at an event on Friday over at Midwest Ground Covers. They were holding a pollinator event. They were giving tours of some of their propagation and growing areas. And it was, if you recall correctly, on Friday, we were having quite a bit of rain. You know, again, this drought that we were in just had so many things on hold, and our plants were looking so, you know, just kind of droopy and sad. The flowers weren't lasting long. And the insects too were, a lot of our local bugs, they spend a lot of their life in their immature stages, and to advance to that next stage, they need to molt. And in order to molt, they need to have moisture. And so I think a lot of things were just kind of marking time there. Well, finally the rains have come, and with that, all kinds of, I hope that's not a sign of things to come. But anyway, the stag beetles are out and about. At this pollinator event, this stag beetle was spotted on the concrete, which is right where a lot of people were going to be walking. So what then ensued was a little happy band of nature nerds that descended on the beetle using one of the species lists, and I believe this is a map of the growing areas. They scooped up the male stag beetle. In fact, let's go back for a second. This is a male. We can tell that by the size of these mandibles. And also the males tend to emerge first. This is the last stage of their life. And the males are going to use those large mandibles, which, yes, they do pinch. Some insects, like our male Dobson flies, they have really large mandibles in the front that are almost completely useless. They're just used for display, and females base their mate selection based on the size of those mandibles. But with the stag beetles, the boys really like to mix it up. They push each other around, and they then establish who's going to be around when the females start to emerge. And I would imagine they'll start showing up now pretty soon too, now that we're getting some rain. But anyway, not wanting to be pinched, we swooped in and picked up this stag beetle and placed it here. This is in an area, yeah, that's my thumb. Placed it over here where there's some mulch. We weren't exactly sure where it had come from. But this was certainly out of harm's way. And actually mulch beds are a likely spot to find stag beetles. Dead and decaying wood is where they hang out. And this one, hopefully, is going to live happily ever after, maybe find another male to wrestle with, and maybe later find a female to mate with. Speaking of those females, that may just kind of warm your little eco-green heart, doesn't it? Well, here's a female stag beetle, and look at these mandibles as a comparison to the males. They're they're shorter, but they're very strong, every bit as strong, and maybe even stronger. In fact, I've gotten harder pinches from the female stag beetles than I have from the males. This, by the way, the species we have in this area is Lucanus capreolus. Capreolus is a reference to a little goat, and I guess that comes from the mandibles that look kind of like horns. Anyway, you want to use a little bit of caution when you handle the females too, because like I said, they can pinch. The goal, of course, is for the males to find the females, and she will then lay eggs in that decaying wood, whether it's an old stump or whether it's wood chips. And over time, those eggs will develop into these large grubs. It's a 2-year life cycle. And again, it's just kind of mind-blowing that these insects that we're so familiar with in their adult stage, we're really only seeing the very last, the very shortest part of their life cycle. On the right here, this is a stag beetle larva, and look too, they can pinch as well. They've got these mouth parts. In their case, though, it's not so much for defense, although they, like I said, they will pinch if need be. But they are living amongst that decaying wood, and they're performing a really valuable service of turning that wood, decomposing that wood even farther. They will consume both the cellulose and the lignin in the wood. Those are the parts that give a wood its strength. They cannot, however, do that without the presence of different types of fungus that also help break the wood down. So they have to work together with that. Another cool thing they do is one of the first things they do when they hatch, when they're teeny tiny little larvae, they will consume the egg that they came out of, and that introduces into their intestinal system, their digestive system. It brings in bacteria and yeast that they inherit from their mom, and it kind of seeds the digestive tract, and it gets things pumped and primed and ready to start feeding on wood. They eject little pellets, which are very rich in nutrients, and they are an essential part of the continuous recycling that's going in our local woodlands. You might also remember from last year, Lincoln Park here in downtown St. Charles had, well, for many years had a playground, and it had wood chips as the base. And last year, as part of our capital improvement budget, it was time to replace that playground at Lincoln Park. So the place that I always used to go to watch stag beetles emerge and watch the males wrestle with each other, and I'd watch the males chase after the females, and all of that sort of ended when they scraped those old wood chips away. So I'm actually on the search for another playground with wood chips, or another source of mulch like that I can go and observe these really, really cool creatures. But anyway, this is happening right now. The stag beetles, particularly the males, are also drawn to lights. So you might find one if you have a light on your porch that's maybe on a timer that stays on till 10 o'clock or midnight or something, you might come out the next morning and find you've got a stag beetle on your porch or your deck, and you wonder, well, what's it doing here on my porch? My deck isn't rotting, is it? No, it's not. It was just drawn to the light that was either by your door or your windows. But anyway, very cool things happening right now. Keep an eye out for them. Now, next, another thing that's happening right now. Yeah, here's a gray cat. Woohoo! That's my cat, Jimmy. Always very photogenic, but in fact, this is not about a gray cat. This is about a gray cat bird, and it's this guy right here. I was out for a walk the other day with some of the nature nerds. We were walking along the Fox River Trail, actually headed towards Harner's for the Friday fish fry in North Aurora. But I was drawn to a thick set of shrubs. In that case, this is not, by the way, my photo. You can tell that because this is in focus and nicely framed. There's no fingers protruding on either side. This was a stock photo, but the catbird I heard was actually in a thicket. It was a combination of buckthorn and mulberries. And catbirds do feed pretty prolifically on berries, and it's mulberry season, so it made total sense. I didn't actually see the bird though, I only heard it. Listen, these birds are mimics, and I could just listen to them all day long. They just go on and on and on. Kind of like some naturalists I know, but it's kind of fun to listen in to see if you can pick out the sounds of other birds. In this area, I'm hearing a little cardinal, some of those. A little bit of robin is in there. They mimic, in addition, oh. So that's a happy catbird just singing along. Now, what happens when they get disturbed or interrupted, the sound they make is actually where their name comes from. They switch from this continuous gibbering, jabbering to a meow, to a meow, meow. And they've actually had people tell me that they've gone out and searched. They thought that maybe there was a stray cat or a lost cat in their yard because they heard this continual mewing sound. And it took a while to figure out that it was actually not a cat, but a cat bird that was making the sound. But if you get a chance, if you find yourself in a thick growth, I mentioned mulberries, elderberry, stand of elderberry is another great place to look and listen for these birds. You can usually spot them if you stand still long enough, but sometimes the foliage is just too thick and you have to let your ears do the listening and just enjoy it. But they're singing right now, and it's a really joyful and fun sound to listen to. See how many different species you can identify of the mimic songs that they're doing. Kind of fun. Now, a few weeks ago, we had our own special guest, Professor Valerie Blaine, was here on the Good Natured Hour, and she was reporting what she'd found down at Forest Glen Forest Preserve in Vermilion County. Those were the periodical cicadas. And we are not due to see those here in our area until 2024 when brood 13 emerges. But it is, though, time for our annual cicadas, which I would argue are every bit as interesting. In fact, even maybe a little bit more so, because there's been less time, less research devoted to their life cycle. What we know is, and you can see, there's that little squiggly tilde there. The nymph stage is about 4 years. So not as impressive as 17, but on the other hand, still pretty pretty awe-inspiring that something as fragile as an insect, something that does not have a solid skeleton, it's just covered in the crunchy exterior we call an exoskeleton, but you know, a plus or minus 4 years underneath the ground. I don't know where you want to hop in on looking on this chart. Well, let's hop in with where we are right now, where the nymphs are emerging after spending that time underneath the ground. They're not great flyers, so the populations tend to be fairly localized. They're not going to fly, you know, miles and expand their range at all. They will come out and they'll flutter over to a tree. The males are what we're hearing now singing, and they're attracting, performing for the females, who will then make their choice. The mating will occur. The females will deposit their eggs. The eggs are laid actually up in the trees. They hatch after a couple of months' time. Those nymphs will drop down to the ground, and they immediately start digging and feeding on tree roots. Instar is the term that we use to refer to different developmental stages of these nymphs. And we use the term nymph as opposed to larva because they don't have a pupal stage. They don't make a cocoon sort. They're not you know, dramatically changing. They're just kind of getting larger and larger and larger. They're developing, their wing pads are growing along the way. And then when they come out of the ground, those wings drop down and fill with fluid, and flight is enabled. So this occurs over and over again. It's not synchronized, so we see them every year, but just bear in mind those annual cicadas, it's much longer than 1 year in between the parents and when their offspring emerge as adults. So who is it that we're seeing and hearing right now? Well, I got to tell you, I have tried, and I'm going to keep trying to be able to identify these birds, these bugs by their markings. These are different images I've been collecting. I think there's about 4 different annual cicada species in this area. That does not count the periodical cicadas. Brood 13, there's 3 more species that make up that brood. And we've switched, the experts have switched from using the genus name Tibicen to Neotibicen to refer to these different species that we have. So let's forget for a moment what they look like, because they are so very similar, and let's focus on what they sound like. And I'm going to start off with the scissor grinder cicada, because this is the one I heard the other night. I was over at my mom's doing my weekend gig, and I was out in the yard. I started mowing late in the afternoon. When I started the mower around 5 o'clock, I didn't hear any insects, but when I shut the mower off at 6 o'clock, I heard this. So hear that pulsing kind of in a crescendo. It's funny, you can identify these insects by their distinct sounds that they make, but there's also some variation in when they start. This one is a late afternoon singer, so it makes sense that I didn't hear it until 6 o'clock. Scissor grinder, I don't know how many of you can relate to that term. I have a little connection that actually goes back to my mom's house when I was growing up. And maybe you had this too in neighborhoods or where you grew up, but we had a fellow that would come around in the summertime. He was always dressed all in black. He had almost looked like a chimney sweep. I had a big black hat on and a black coat. Didn't matter if it was summertime, if it was hot out. But he would be pushing a cart that had some little bells on it, and the cart had this grinding wheel, and you'd hear him, and there'd be little bells that he would be ringing as he pushed his cart along. And then you'd come out and you'd bring your knives and your scissors and you'd get them sharpened right there on the curb in front of your house. So whenever I hear this sound, I always picture that wheel turning. Starts off kind of slow, but that cyclical pulse. If you just kind of imagine the wheel turning, scissors being sharpened. Neotobison pronosa, the scissor grinder cicada. Okay, so keep that sound in mind because now we're going to listen to Linnaeus cicada. This one, I always think of a salt shaker. Some people think of a lawn sprinkler. This one is probably our most common species, and it starts off in the morning. I'm not going to say early in the morning because we're talking insects, not birds. Early for might be 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, but this is what you're going to listen for. It starts off as kind of a buzz. But it morphs into a vibrato. And you can just kind of picture, you know, those long sprinklers, you know, that shoot water in a circle. Let's listen to it again. Okay, so similar, but when you really listen, it's quite different from the scissor grinder. So, and also the time of day is going to be a clue too. You hear this early, again, in quotes, early in the day, earlier in the day. That's Linnaeus cicada. All right, so next, this is Canicularis, the dog day cicada. It's a little bit smaller and it's kind of whiny. The vibrations come so quickly that it almost sounds like a whine as opposed to a buzzing sound. My memory of dog day cicadas takes me back to Champaign-Urbana and sitting in class in August in one of the older buildings on campus where we'd have the windows open because there's no air conditioning. And these dog day cicadas would be buzzing away. You'll notice we're using the term vibration as we talk about how they make their sound. Instead of rubbing instead of rubbing parts together, like rubbing wings together or rubbing legs together, the cicadas actually make their sound by buckling these rib-like structures on their abdomen. And that sound kind of echoes the male's abdominal area is kind of hollow, and it causes this sound to get really loud. It's a much different way of making sound than our crickets, our grasshoppers, our katydids, but nonetheless effective. So let's look at our fourth species here, the lyric cicada. I wouldn't lyrical, but it has a very, very long call. And we have them here because they like to live near water. This is a morning singer, not to say that we wouldn't hear it later in the day, but they tend to concentrate their calls, their songs in the morning. So a rattling trill is how it's described. Almost sound like there's a loose part. And it just keeps going and going and going. Let's try this one again. There's a couple of them in this particular recording. Now, again, the whole purpose of this ritual that the males are performing is so that they can find a female and the species can go on. Even though I'm not real good at telling the different species by sight, it is pretty easy to tell the males from the females. Here we've got side-by-side comparisons of the male and the female. The female is actually on the left and the male's on the right. And the male's abdomen, it's hard to see in this photo, but it kind of reminds me of a mechanical pencil with the without the lead sticking out. You can kind of see it there. The female's, the tip of her abdomen is this ovipositor that she uses, which is kind of like a little saw blade. She's got it tucked inside there. Here's a photo that shows that ovipositor in action. She's got it swung out, and they do actually they make marks, and you can find those marks on the twigs where they've laid their eggs at. But it's that's another kind of cool party trick that you might want to tote out at a neighborhood barbecue or something this summer. Being able to tell the males from the females is pretty impressive. Fun thing to do. Now, I was hoping that I could find out the date, and I don't have it handy right now, but I will give you information in August. In fact, we might actually not have a Good Natured Hour on a Tuesday night in August. Gosh, I wish I could remember the date, but Carl Strang, who's kind of the local guru of singing insects, we are so lucky to have him coming here to King County, and he is going to do a class, a Learn from the Experts class on singing insects of King County. It's for general information, but it's also to help any of you who would like to become singing insect monitors. That's another of the citizen science, or I guess we're now calling them community science efforts that's going on here in King County. But Carl every year produces his guide to singing insects of the Chicago region. It's an impressive document. In fact, if you'd like a copy of that, let me know. I'd be glad to email it to you, and certainly give Carl full credit on that. But he's a retired naturalist. He worked for DuPage County for many years, and now he spends most of his summertime days going around and kind of performing a census of all of the singing insects that we have from up into southern Wisconsin and throughout northeastern Illinois, and then also into northwest Indiana. So it's a cool document, and he's got, besides species descriptions, there's also links so that you can hear the songs and calls, not just of cicadas, but of our crickets and our grasshoppers and our katydids. So it's kind of fun, and it's nice to be able to learn from someone who's got them so well sorted out. So if you'd like that, drop me a line, let me know, put a note in the chat, and I'll be glad to email that to you. So with that, we're going to wind it up for tonight. Next week, thanks to the recent rains, we're finally going to be able to talk about toads. They gave it a go with their singing in May, but they were kind of few and far between. But my goodness, last week it sounded like May outside as they were singing. Got a cool email and led me to learn more about the Promethea moth, which is a giant silk moth that's present in Illinois, but it's a little bit different from the ones we're used to seeing, our Polyphemus and Luna and Cecropia moths. We're going to learn a little bit about Promethea moths. Solitary wasps, I was going to do that tonight, but I got some new information today from courtesy of our Kids in Nature Camp. So we're going to delay that till next week and talk a little bit about the solitary wasps and their life cycle and the prey, which is often integral to trying to identify them. Reader emails and who knows what else will be coming up next week. So with that, I'm going to stop the screen share. And oh gosh, we got lots of chats here. So let's see. Okay, Sarah has a question. Bob and Kathy, listen to this. I've heard that a lot of birds in Indiana are dying and that people should take down their bird feeders to prevent the spread of disease. Do we have to worry about that here? Oh, and somebody was having trouble hearing me. I hope we got that issue resolved. Yeah, so Sarah, I've heard a couple of, I have been hearing about that. And Julie Sickafus, who's a naturalist, her writing, she's got her own books. She also writes for, I think it's Birdwatchers Digest. And Bob and Kathy, feel free to chime in or chat as well. She was wondering if maybe that was connected to the use of insecticides in some areas because people were worried about cicadas, and then the birds were consuming cicadas that had poison on them. I also remember, Valerie, you had sent me some information about, was it a fungus that was growing inside of the periodical cicada nymphs? I'm wondering if that might have turned into something that turned out to be toxic to birds too. But the areas, you know, Illinois DNR is saying until they get it figured out, that we should be cautious. I know Kathy said that she hasn't heard about it occurring in Illinois yet. When you look at the map that of where these bird deaths are being reported, it does seem to kind of mimic that of the brood 10 cicada emergence, but it's too soon to tell yet. I brought my bird bath in. I don't have bird feeders out right now. In fact, I never have bird feeders out. But I do put water out, and I did bring the bird bath in today and soaked it in bleach. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to put it out. I'm thankful that we're having some rain. I was so worried about the birds and the drought. I was glad to be offering them water. I'm not sure if I'm when I'll put it back out, but IDNR did issue a statement today saying that we should be using caution until this thing gets figured out. But again, that it does, preliminary thought is that it is somehow related to the brood 10 emergence. So let's see, what are our other chats? Looks like we, Jerry's had Nighthawks. Yeah, you know, finding them sitting still, it's usually a daytime sort of a thing, and they blend in so well. That outline that they have and that cryptic coloration really helps them to blend in the daytime. They're hard to see. And we got a tip from John that they've been on the Shelby, over at the Shelby School. Okay, so that's that would explain why they're going up and down 3rd Street. Thanks, John, for that tip. That building is actually just about a block and a half from Good Natured World Headquarters. So I might go check that out this evening. Laura McKinsey, this sounds like the voice of experience, Laura, that the beetle's pinch does hurt and the beetle does not let go until it feels safe. So, so you did a little demonstration for the nature campers. Bless your heart, Laura. Appreciate you taking one for the team there. Seeing a stag beetle on Sunday. Yeah, and you know, they do crawl pretty fast, and their claws, the claws don't really hurt, but it is a little bit of a eerie, prickly feeling as they're moving up your skin. I know last year I had carried some home with me on purpose. I was doing a little experiment and I had one crawl up my arm. And just when I got kind of used to that, it got up to my neck. And that was a really different sort of experience. And my son sent me a picture of a stag beetle from his yard. Yeah, please share. They are, and some people look at them as they're afraid of them, or they look as though they might be somewhat harmful to people. Are always worried about getting bugs in the wood of their house, and that's not their purpose at all. It's the decaying trees and tree stumps. And it's really a vital service that they provide. Yes, the catbird is very good at scolding. When you get too close to the nesting area. Again, sounds like the voice of experience, this time coming from Susie. And Trees, I'm sorry, I don't know who Trees is. I know we've probably been signing in for a while, but northern Wisconsin, I'm glad that you're trying to sign in. Thank you, Greg and Carol. Did you guys look that up for us? And I believe that is a Tuesday, August 17th for Carl Strang at Creek Bend Nature Center. Yeah, so I think we might not have a good natured hour that night so that we can get as many people as possible attending that program. Or maybe we bounce good natured hour to another night that week. We'll figure something out, but thank you so much for that. So yeah, August 17th, mark your calendars for, if you're in the area, for Creek Bend Nature Center. And then and thank you too, Sarah, for getting that date for me. Appreciate that. So the moth recipe, yeah, if you want to bait your trees for moths, and by the way, this works for stag beetles too, because the adult stag beetle does not feed on decaying wood. They are drawn to fermenting fruits and sometimes nectar, but when they're coming out, this is when the berries, like the mulberries, are falling to the ground, and they'll consume some of the juices from that. So what I've found works is, and you can Google, because there's some people are wine moth juice makers. I'm actually a beer moth juice maker. So I take a can or a bottle of beer and I open it up and I leave it on the counter for 2 or 3 days and kind of let it kind of ferment a little bit. And then I mush up a banana, a very, very ripe banana. I always have some in the freezer for making banana bread. So, those bananas that have gone black and are just beyond, you can't bring them back. Mush that up in the beer. If you use a blender, that will help with the consistency too. Then I throw in maybe a 1/4 cup of grape jelly and a couple of dribs. So maybe, a couple tablespoons of maple syrup. And what you want to do is you want to create a slurry. So a thin milkshake is, or if you're familiar with what wallpaper paste is like, that's a good consistency. You don't want it so thick that it's going on in globs, because what you do then is, once you've created it, I even will let it sit another day on the counter just to let it all ferment a little bit more. Then you take it outside and you paint it on a tree with a paintbrush, and you let it sit. The moths that come to it are usually the later night moth, later flying moths. So 10 o'clock and after is when you check that. I will also warn you that it will leave a mark on the tree that eventually washes away, but it can leave a dark stain on the tree. It doesn't seem to harm the tree. And you do get some pretty cool moths attracted to it. My favorites are the underwing moths. In fact, maybe we'll do a segment on those in a little bit once they start showing up this summer. Okay, and Diane has, getting back to that issue of the dying birds, Illinois DNR said there's no problem reported to date, just advised to keep them cleaned and maintained. Okay. It's good to know. So yeah, so using a 10% bleach solution is the best way to clean your feeders. And the thing with a bleach solution is you scrub and then you let it air dry, and that's the key to getting that disinfection maximized. If you let that dry, air dry, and then once it's air dry, if you want to rinse it again, you can, but it's during that drying process that the sanitizing aspect of the bleach really kicks in. So yeah, and since we have gotten rain, some molds and mildews they grow a little bit easier now, and those too can cause problems. So keeping up with the bird feeder maintenance is a good idea. It's just a good idea. And with that, does anybody else have anything they'd care? I really appreciate all the input tonight. Does anybody else have anything they'd care to share with the group? If not, it is 9:03. That means it's bedtime. I am going to go out again. John, thank you for that tip on Shelby School. I'm going to head home that way and see if I can get some glimpse of the Nighthawks in action. Anyway, everybody have a great rest of your evening. Enjoy the humidity. It's not a drought anymore. Appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Pam.
Thanks, Pam.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Pam.
Thanks, Pam.
Thanks, Pam.